What is the most unprofessional thing a medical professional has ever said or done to you? So, a doctor couldn't get the speculum in. After a lot of pushing it, it finally painfully slams inside of me. The doctor was excited by his achievement and goes, "Atta girl, that's my champ." And the nurse looked at him in horror. I burst out laughing, and he realizes almost immediately that was very weird, turns completely red and goes, "I'm so sorry, I coach Little League." Next story. In high school, my mom set me up with a therapist because she thought all teenagers should have someone to talk to about teenage angsty crap. In the first meeting, he asked me about why I was here, and I said it was pretty normal, and he scoffed and said, "No, you're not. Normal people don't get sent to therapy." I never went back. Next story. In college, I had to go to the ER because I kept throwing up a lot. A nurse came in and asked me some questions, when did it start, etc. Then she asks if my back hurt, and I said it did a little bit, and she grunted, "Aha!" like she knew exactly what was wrong. And I was like, "What is it?" And she explained, I was pregnant, and I told her that actually wasn't the case. And she said, "You can't really know that." Yes, I can because I actually know how babies are made. And I eventually demanded they run a pregnancy test, and yeah, I wasn't pregnant. Next story. 2 weeks ago, my IUD displaced, resulting in a trip to the ER. The attending nurse asked who the guy was with me, who had left to scope out the vending machine for some snacks, and I replied that he was my boyfriend of nearly 6 years. And her response was, "You're 31, not married, and don't have any kids? Who gave you an IUD?" And rolled her eyes. This was at a well-respected hospital in PA. The nurse was younger than I was. Next story. Not me, but my sister-in-law. After her first appointment confirming her pregnancy, the doctor called sister-in-law's dad to give him the good news, and dad spread the news around. But they weren't going to tell anyone for about 2 months. Slight breach in confidentiality. Next story. About 4 years ago, I fell with a bottle in my hand and cut through all of the tendons and nerves from my pinky to the middle finger. The cut was about 6 centimeters long. Anyway, I went to the doctor the next day, and after waiting for 2 hours in the lobby, I went to see him. He took 3 minutes to examine my hand before telling me to go home and rinse water with an antiseptic. And I remember feeling elated by his calm demeanor and thought this wound wasn't too serious. And I went home and did as he said. A couple of days later, I traveled back home to Switzerland. Plane trip was very painful, and I took the bandage off when I got home and showed my mom. She went completely ballistic since the wound had gone septic and my fingers were turning blue. I also had no movement or feeling in my pinky and its neighbor. She rushed me to the ER immediately, where I received 23 stitches in my hand. The severed nerves had to be extended and tied together, and the doctor told me I was extremely close to requiring an amputation of all 3 fingers. I later complained to the hospital in Denmark about the doctor, but I probably should have sued. He failed to tell me the severity of my wound. Cut tendons and nerves, so I think that qualifies as being extremely unprofessional. To this day, when I clench my fist, my pinky, it just points straight. Next story. I took my college roommate to the ER after an attempted date SA. A guy from our floor ran into her at a party and disappeared into the kitchen to make her a special drink, which she accepted because she was 18 and naive and believed this guy was her friend. Half an hour later, the RA caught this guy trying to drag her unconscious body into his dorm room. The RA told the guy, "Nope, this isn't happening," picked my roommate up and brought her back to our suite. She was still really messed up the next morning, way more messed up than she should have been after having only 2 drinks the night before, as in she could barely stay awake. So I brought her to the ER. And the doctors couldn't have been ruder or less sympathetic. Rolled his eyes when I explained that she'd only had 2 drinks and said something along the lines of, "You expect me to believe that?" Heavily implied that she had deserved what happened to her and that the incident would teach her a lesson about drinking too much. When we asked for a drug test, he refused and went off about how it was a waste of time because less than 1% of people actually test positive for date SA drugs, and he knew that she was just drunk and lying because she regretted going home with this guy. Well, we loaded her into a car and drove her to the hospital 1 town over, and she tested positive for Rohypnol. Surprise, dude, sometimes people are that 1 in 100 case. But the story still doesn't have a happy ending, though. When my roommate went to the university with the drug test results, they sat her down for a meeting about how the guy in question would be ruined and lose his football scholarship if she accused him. And was she really sure she wanted to do that? They implied that she had voluntarily taken the drug and that she would get in trouble for violating the school's drug and alcohol policy if she came forward. Her grades tanked, and she barely finished college. I switched my major to psychology later that year, and now I work with SA victims for a living. This incident was 5 years ago, and I'm still mad. Next story. My old OBGYN. First meeting getting a routine pap smear, starts pap smear and says to me, "So, I see you work at the local university. What do you do?" "Oh, I'm a chemistry professor." "Wow, I wish my chemistry professor had looked like you." "Dude, you're elbow deep in my vagina. Can you not comment on my appearance?" Next story. I got really drunk at a party one time, fell and got a huge cut on my head that wouldn't stop bleeding. Went to the hospital, they stapled my head together and let me rest for about 3 hours. Then they handed me a brochure without saying anything and told me I could go. So there I am in the street, completely wasted, in nearly freezing weather. Hailed a cab, and when I got out, I literally fainted in the street. A neighbor asked if I needed to go to a hospital, to which I replied with, "I just came from the hospital." And I got helped to my apartment and passed out on my bed for about 10 hours. When I wake up, I pull up the brochure out of my pocket, which basically says, "You may have a concussion. It is very important for you not to be alone for the next 24 hours. Those bastards. Edit. One point I would like to add, since I had a head injury, they wrapped it up in a bandage before sending me off on my way. If you've ever seen the episode of Faulty Towers where Basil has a concussion, that's how effing ridiculous I looked passed out on the street. Next story. In second grade, age 7, I fell off of the monkey bars at school and landed on my wrist. I could feel that something was seriously wrong, but the school nurse shrugged it off and sent me to class. I was forced to use the wrist, my writing hand, for the rest of the day. When my mom came to pick me up, the nurse told her I had been hamming it up. And all afternoon I was doing that, apparently. Fortunately, my parents have half a brain and saw that it was obviously broken. I had a cast for 3 months, and that nurse didn't look me in the eye for the rest of my elementary school career. Oh, and apparently the break was barely a centimeter from the growth plate. I came within a centimeter of having a 7-year-old's hand for the rest of my life. Would have been a fun bar story, at least. Edit. So this probably would not have happened, but as a worst-case scenario, maybe. Next story. I've had 2 separate unrelated therapists fall asleep while I was talking. Because of my work schedule, my therapy appointments would be at the end of the day. Word to the wise, always schedule therapy appointments early in the day. Next story. My first pelvic exam for a yeast infection. Doctor refuses to do the pelvic because I had told her I was not and had not ever been sexually active. Said I wouldn't be able to handle the speculum. Finally, though, convince her and she takes a look, comes up yelling about how I lied to her. My hymen was torn, ergo, I had had sex. And that's the story of how I told a medical professional that hymens can tear thanks to many non-sexual situations. Alright, y'all, so we've had a bit of an influx of medical stories, more so ones on the negative side, but I'm starting to realize maybe I could just be a medical professional at this point. Just waltz in, put on the lab coat, and say, "Hey, what's up? Tell me what's going on." Honestly, if I just believed every patient and just prescribed whatever they wanted, I would probably have better reviews and ratings than these people. I get it, some people do lie, but there should not be this amount of nuh-uh from doctors. Oh, God. Anyway, next story. So, I was told that I have cancer over the phone whilst being berated for her not being able to reach me faster. I was sent home from the ER while suffering from a ruptured and necrotic fallopian tube because the doctor was convinced I just had an STD, despite negative tests, and a week later, I lost half my pelvic organs and an appendix in emergency surgery. Next story. Female walk-in clinic did not want to look at my wiener. She took a quick glance at the infected cut on my junk and told me I had an STD for sure. Then she scolded me about unprotected sex. After testing me for everything, I went home without antibiotics, and I was picturing my life with an STD. A few weeks later, I saw a real doctor and she diagnosed it right away. Her assistant stood in the corner facing the wall because she couldn't handle looking at my wiener. Next story. A friend's wife had been diagnosed with breast cancer and was getting a consultation for a mastectomy, and the doctor told the husband, my friend, that it was a shame because she had really good boobs. He also told him that he had been a lucky man. Richard about lost his crap. Next story. I had a doctor order the nurses to give me an Elavil after I had specifically refused it. She was convinced that my symptoms were caused by depression and wanting to get it off work. Yep, she actually said that to me. And she prescribed Elavil saying that it helps with pain and also it will help with your depression and you'll see everything will look so much brighter. And I refused. saying I wasn't depressed, other than my frustration getting a diagnosis. I tried again to convince her that my pain and inability to hold anything down was not a mental/emotional issue. About a week later, I collapsed. I ended up in the hospital and she told the nurses to give me an Elavil via IV and not tell me. I almost immediately started having extreme tremors and what they called pseudo-Parkinsonism, and one of the nurses slipped up, or actually stepped up, and told me it was caused by the Elavil. I was furious as I had said I did not want to take it. Later on, after going home and several more weeks of constant vomiting, I ended up hypokalemic and completely paralyzed. I was taken by ambulance to another hospital, not in my HMO, and it took them less than a week to find that I had a grapefruit-sized tumor 80% infiltrated from my uterus into my abdomen wall. They sampled it in my lymph nodes and found cancer with lymph involvement on both sides. I underwent a hysterectomy/oophorectomy, and my pain magically disappeared, as well as radiation treatment. And to this day, I have the twitching and the tremors as a souvenir. As a bonus, she told me she had been convinced it wasn't cancer because cancer doesn't hurt. When I saw her again after the surgery, I said something along the lines of, "Well, I guess cancer does hurt after all." And her response is, "Well, it's not the cancer that hurts, it's the nerves that we're compressing." And I told her, in that case, step over here by the door and I'll slam your hand in it. The door slamming won't hurt, just the nerves the door compresses will. Sorry for the rant, it still makes me mad. So the TLDR is, doctor sneaks a drug I refused into my IV, then makes a lame excuse for her misdiagnosis. Edit. Several people have asked. This was back in 2000 when the hospital incident occurred, so it's far too late to sue now. And I should have done so, for many reasons, but at the time I was just tired and weak and lacked the will to deal with it. I moved away from there a few years later and now have excellent medical care at a different facility. Next story. While in the hospital being induced, my second child, the labor nurse, kept disappearing for long periods of time. I'd ask for a yoga ball to sit on. She'd be gone about 40 minutes and come back and every time would say, "I just keep forgetting about you." Or, "My son brought me some lunch and then I totally forgot about you." My labor was only 5 hours long. She forgot about me after I requested my epidural and I started pushing my baby out. Alone in a room with no pain meds or pitocin, I thought I was going to die. Next story. Does the school nurse count as a medical professional? My school nurse started refusing to see me because she decided I was faking my symptoms to get out of school since they were so frequent. Look, I get it. I had a lot of stomach issues and they are easy to fake without a lot of symptoms outside of pain, but I wasn't faking. The stomach aches were the result of stress and anxiety, but they're besides the point. One day during recess, I fell and cut my arm open real bad, and I was sent down to the nurse. My arm was wrapped up in a towel so I wouldn't bleed over everything, so the cut wasn't visible at the moment. She sees me approaching, doesn't even let me explain while I'm there before snapping at me to get back to class. So I go back to class, teacher sees me still bleeding potentially to death, and has to escort me down to the nurse to get my arm checked out. Mom was called, and I did get out of school that day. Suck it, nursey. Next story. When I was in second grade, I jumped off of a slide at recess, and when I landed, my knees came up and hit my mouth, loosening a few baby teeth. The nurse called my mother, and then she took me to the dentist. The dentist got me situated in the chair and told me, "Don't worry, I'm just gonna squeeze your front teeth to check them." And then proceeded to abruptly yank out my front two top teeth with no anesthesia. It hurt like hell and scared the crap out of me, and initiated a 39-year hatred of dentists and dental procedures. F you, Dr. Paul C. Next story. A psychiatrist told me I only identified as a lesbian because I wasn't attractive to men, and that it would change if I put more effort into my appearance. I got a new psychiatrist quickly after that, and I'm still a lesbian. Next story. Went to a walk-in clinic for a rash I had. At the time, I had a black eye from playing rugby. The old white South African doctor asked me how I got it, and I told him rugby. And then he said, "Oh, we used to play that when I was in school. Brutal game. Too many insert racial slur here, playing now in my opinion." And I had no idea what he was talking about until I told some of the guys on my team, and they were pretty offended. Also, he gave me a 30-day prescription of Percocet to treat my rash. He maybe shouldn't have been practicing anymore. Next story. I snapped my banjo string while having sex with my now wife, then girlfriend. We didn't know what had happened at the time, but there were spurts of blood, so we headed down to the A&E. When the nurse called me through to be seen, my wife didn't follow me through, and she, along with the doctor, gave each other a wry look and said, "Are you on your own?" and had a laugh at my expense. They laughed their way through the examination too. Fair play, I suppose, although at the time I did think my wang was broken, so I wasn't seeing the lighter side. Next story. My GP when I was in high school told me my big toenails were falling off because of my marching band shoes. I played split percussion, so I didn't march. Then I was passing out on stage and in rehearsals due to stage fright, which I was adamant about not having performed all of my life. Turned out I had a congenital heart defect that almost killed me a few years later. Then, that she wouldn't give me birth control, even though I was 18, because of marriage and Jesus. And man, that B word. I ended up spending most of my 20s in hospitals because this quack was so bad at her job. Next story. I thought I had strep throat. Felt like crap in general and could see white patches on the back of my throat. Went to my doctor and had to see the PA. He accused me of pill shopping and said come back in a week. Yeah, pill shopping for antibiotics. Came back in a week with lymph nodes the size of golf balls and definitely had strep throat for the past week. I refused to pay the bill for the PA visit and filed a complaint on the PA. Next story. Not to me, but someone I know went to an oncologist because they thought she might have cancer. "So, I've got good news. Your test results are back and you do not have cancer. Congratulations." Then, a week later, she gets a call to schedule her first round of chemo. She says there must be some mistake. The doctor said she was cancer-free. Then the lady on the phone gets real uncomfortable and says, "I have an order here from that doctor that you are to begin chemotherapy, so you better call his office again to straighten this out. And maybe, perhaps contact the lawyer." So she does, and it turns out that all of her charts showed she had cancer. The doctor knew it, but simply lied about it because he didn't like to deliver bad news. After investigating, they discover several other patients who went through exactly the same ordeal. Her chemo and lawsuit are both pending. Could you imagine going to the doctor, not just for cancer or for anything else, and you're like, "Doc, tell me, what do I have?" And he's like, "I don't know, I'm shy." And then he runs away. Bro, what? Man, get that out of here. Anyway, next story. So, had an emergency C-section with my first child. At the time, they required a 4-day hospital stay. Every day, the hospital pediatrician came into the room and said, "You still here? Why don't you go home?" And other comments to indicate I was some kind of gold-bricking a-hole rather than a patient after a major surgery. Still don't know what the hell was wrong with that idiot. Was it his idea of a joke? But anywho, when the purge comes, this dip crap is on my list. Next time, I'll tell about the radiologist who told me I had breast cancer the day before Christmas a few years ago. Happy effing holiday! P.S. I didn't even have breast cancer. Next story. My mom and I share a name, and for a brief time, the same doctor. I was concerned that I might have breast cancer and scheduled a biopsy. My mom's appointment was earlier in the week. He mixed up our info and asked mom about her concerns about breast cancer. When he realized his mistake, he didn't cover by pretending it was another patient. Nope, he shared all of my info. That was an enjoyable phone call I received from my mom. So effing pissed. And then when I confronted him, he laughed it off. Well, I laughed it off when I reported him. Next story. I went in to see my gynecologist because I needed my birth control prescription renewed, and I was 18 and had just become sexually active. She came in and scolded me for having sex with someone I wasn't married to, and that he doesn't love me and he was just using me, that I would end up pregnant and alone, etc., etc. I paid her no mind, but made a mental note from then on about that I would not see her for my appointments. When I went to the pharmacy for my prescription, they said the office had never sent it. I called a million times, went into the office, and each time it was some bullcrap excuse about why it wasn't sent. Turns out she did the same thing to a classmate of mine. I firmly believe she didn't send my prescription on purpose, like she was trying to teach me a lesson. Safe to say, I switched doctors immediately afterwards. P.S. I've now been with that same boyfriend for almost 4 years now, and the premarital sex is fantastic. F you, Mary Jane. All right, everybody, I'm convinced after this video, we're going to get out of here. We're just going to have premarital sex wherever we want, okay? Let's get sitting, let's get a little drunk, hit the road, and just see what happens. You ever gotten a little premarital behind the wheel? Please don't do that. That's a joke. Anyway, next story. So, when I was 10, dermatologists asked if I wanted a painkiller after burning a massive ingrown wart under my heel. As I just had suffered the burning, putting my socks on, it was a relief, so I declined the offer. But then, just 1 minute later, I told my mom that the pain was insufferable and that I would take the painkiller. She asked him, and this piece of crap replied something like, "She should know what she wants." Dude, you burned me. I'm 10, a bit shocked. Can't you understand that I might make a mistake? Next story. When I first got insurance through my husband, I had to find a new doctor. I had an ear infection and went to see random new doctor on insurance. Now, I frequently have ear infections, so it's usually in and out. Doc looks at my ear, clucks, and gives me a prescription. This doctor then asks me about my symptoms, and I tell her. And instead of looking at my ear, she starts asking me other questions. Well, are you nauseous? Right now? No. Well, are you ever nauseous? Well, yeah, occasionally. Oh, honey, I can't prescribe you anything because you're pregnant. That's why you're nauseous. You don't even take any pain meds or you'll hurt the baby. So, I found myself back in my car with orders for a blood pregnancy test and an anxiety attack. During the whole appointment, the doctor never even looked at my ear or did anything else except ask about nausea. After I calmed down, I ditched the test orders and went to urgent care, where, surprise, I had an ear infection. Never went back to that doctor, but did get a call months later asking if I'd done the pregnancy test and to come back for prenatal care. Over 10 years later, still not pregnant. Next story. My son's pediatrician told me that he was getting sick too often at daycare, and that if I really cared, I'd do what's best for him and keep him home, rather than let him be cared for and taught by strangers. It was his first ever ear infection. I cried in the parking lot and then I changed doctors. Next story. I had rectal cancer and had a temporary ostomy. After 2 weeks, I had what is called a mucocutaneous separation, where the ostomy pulls away from the skin, and it scared me. I thought I would be able to see my intestines writhing around in there. Turns out, no big deal though, but I do get a call from the hospital to follow up, and the nurse asks how I was doing, and I describe what happened. And this nurse starts going on about how disgusting ostomies are, and the smell and having to look at it, which was pretty funny, but by no stretch what I expected from a professional. Next story. I was informed by an absolute genius that my depression wasn't severe at all, and I just needed to try harder to succeed in school. I was 17 and had just left a mental hospital after failing 2 consecutive grades due to depression, and was catatonic upon admittance to the hospital. On the plus side, I looked him up and he seems to be unable to find work as a clinical psychologist. Next story. When I was in my 20s, I was getting a ton of blood taken to rule out a bunch of diseases and zero in on the horrible one I knew I have/was eventually diagnosed with. So I was a mess from that weighing on my mind. Add to it, I am severely phobic of getting my blood taken and was a crying mess. Now, the phlebotomist didn't know what I had been through or what was going on with me. I looked perfectly healthy, right? Just a drama queen, I guess she thought. She was so incredibly rude to me. She told me how her brother had just died from Lou Gehrig's and I had no right to be crying, and basically called me a loser. Like, some people might be able to toughen up a little bit, but I was not that person and not on that day. And at that point, I got angry, and I told her I hated her. Well, that did not go well for me either because she launched in a verbal beatdown while taking 9 vials of blood from me. It was just a really bad experience for me. Not as bad as some of these, but it was really unprofessional and did zero to help with my blood phobia. Next story. Went into an urgent care because I had a sore throat. The doctor took a look at me and said, "Well, it's probably strep, but it could be HIV. I'll prescribe some penicillin, but if it doesn't clear up, come back and see me." Really, dude? I get it. I'm in college. You don't need to effing scare me into safe sex by trying to make me worry that something super common could be a potentially life-threatening illness. That's what WebMD is for. Next story. Had a doctor tell me that the spot of blood pooling on my side of my leg was probably nothing, and that if I was worried about it, I should take a picture once a month and chart how much bigger it was getting. A short while later, the varicose vein in my leg that was causing the spot burst as I was stepping out of the shower, sending a 3-foot stream of blood shooting across the bathroom floor. It looked like a murder scene in my bathroom when the paramedics arrived. I had stopped the bleeding by then, take a first aid course, folks, but went to the ER anyway, who couldn't do anything for it since I stopped the bleeding anyway. But saw a vein specialist who closed off some veins around the site and haven't had an issue with it since, but definitely need to have that vein removed completely. Next story. Spent 2 years going to and from monthly or weekly doctor's visits for multiple specialists and my GP due to multiple car accidents. I have diagnosed spinal damage, TMJ, fibromyalgia, and chronic pain. Then, during a visit, I joked that I see her and my other doctors more often than my own mother. She looked at me and said, "Wow, really? That's really sad," in the most judgy damn voice ever. So I said, "Yeah, I can't leave my house or drive most days. I literally save up my strength for doctor's appointments and spinal shots for the spinal damage. And then she looked down her nose at me and said, "What? Spinal damage? Are you sure?" And I was very sure, as she had recommended me to most of the specialists I was seeing, including a psychiatrist for my depression for my chronic pain. I ended up switching doctors literally that day. Best decision I ever made. Next story. When I was 14, I went to the dermatologist for acne and they wanted me to get on a medication that was very harsh on the body and would require a blood test each month to make sure my liver was fine. I said I was unsure if I wanted to take it because of the side effects, but she told me, "Well, then you'll just be ugly for the rest of your life then." I left in tears. Next story. I was told, "Well, there's nothing in your eye because I can't see it, so you're imagining it and there's nothing I can do." Then the med intern says, "No, wait, I want to try again." Proceeds to find the broken contact lens that tore up my eye so bad I thought I had liquefied it. I hadn't, thankfully. And I just wanted to hug that intern. People like her are what medicine needs. I knew that lens was in there. F you, Violet. I hope you get sued. Next story. I needed my doctor to recommend a specialist. She wasn't there, so I saw someone else at the practice. The first thing he did when he walked in was stroke the length of my thigh while I sat on the exam table. When I asked about the recommendation, he just Googled the type of specialist in the area. Then he could not figure out how to print from Google Maps and kept running back and forth to the printer. I left and I found my own specialist. Then another time, there was the doctor who told me my own medical history I was telling him was wrong. He didn't have any records, but of course I don't know what happened to me. And then recently, one of my doctors wanted to start me on the only medication to cause me a severe allergic reaction. I know it is listed in my file. My mom said her doctor did the same thing for a topical cream. Thank goodness she patch tested it and checked the ingredients. Next story. When I was 12, my dentist told my parents, within earshot of me, that I had the worst overbite he'd ever seen. My father was in graduate school and couldn't afford to get me braces. Over 20 years later, I've never forgotten it, and it's the reason I rarely smile in photos. Next story. My gorgeous sister has Bell's palsy and is a little slow on the uptake. She was 18 and getting 6 stitches under her eyebrow after catching a softball with her eye socket during a bullying incident at a church over a Mormon. I asked the doctor if there would be much of a scar, and he said, "Well, I could use the smaller thread to make sure there won't be any scar, but it's not like she's a model or anything." Edit. By the way, she still has a visible 2-inch scar 21 years later. So if he was trying to be funny because he was such an awesome doctor, he didn't succeed at the awesome part. And unrelated, but her nickname was Einstein in high school, so it kind of is now really working with the scar. Next story. I told my school nurse that I was bulimic for 5 years and I wanted to stop. She was very supportive and kind, which was great because she was the first person that I told. She told me to come back the next day during my spare time to talk about what to do next. I was walking up the stairs to see her when I heard her talking to a teacher that I didn't know about me. They were gossiping about me and discussing why I would even want to tell the nurse. In retrospect, I shouldn't have, but it was crushing. Next story. There's been a couple, but this one was outrageous. I had a stomach virus for 4 days and could barely keep anything down. Nurse randomly asks me if I've been taking my bipolar meds, and I said no, because it would just be a huge waste of money since I was throwing up. But I assured her I was fine. Then documents say I have history of hallucinations, and she gets visibly nervous and her voice goes high when she asks if I have any problems because of it. I say I've had a very few mild hallucinations, but nothing like I've had in the past. And she proceeds to excuse herself, go into the hallway, and freak the F out loudly to the doctor and other nurses, saying my full effing name where other patients could hear. I immediately jump up, run to the door, and tell her to please shut up and stop breaking HIPAA and that I'm not crazy for her to be losing her mind over 4 days without Seroquel. All right, everyone, let's just take a quick pause real quick. Let's just imagine this. Think back to your time in high school. Think of the worst mean girl or just spoiled rich girl that you know, and imagine her as a nurse. Can you imagine that? That's horrible. That's the people in this story. I don't want Brittany to be a nurse. Oh, God, no. Ugh. Anyway, next story. So I've been in the hospital once or twice every month for the previous 7 months. I've known about my disease since birth, so 23 years. I go in because my stats aren't normal and breathing is worse. It was nighttime, so I go through ER. They say I have pneumonia. A couple of days into the stay, a pulm doctor who works with my CF doctor, he says, comes into my room and proceeds to tell me that I have CF. like explains what it is to me. I'm in shock that this dude has the audacity to tell me this like it's groundbreaking news. Then tells me that CF patients have IV antibiotics, gets PICC and do treatment at home. Do you know what that is? Yeah. If you look at my arms, they have multiple PICC scars on them, and that I have IV antibiotics going through me as he speaks. And my nurse was in the room at the time to swap out the antis, and she turned around and told him to stop, and she says, "She knows more about CF than you and I. If she wanted to open up a unit, she could." And he said, "Oh, good," and asked if I had any questions. Yeah, I have a question. Am I here because of pneumonia? If so, how bad? Or because one of my pseudos flared? And then he says, I don't know. I didn't look at your chart before I came in." And I was like, man, get out. Next story. I can't really remember this, but my parents told me about it. Apparently, I was like super hyper as a kid, and one day I was being really lethargic, so my mother brought me to the local doctor. He gave me a quick look over and said, "Nah, he's grand." When I got home, my father was back from work and was like, "No, there's something wrong with OP here." So brought me back to the doctor, and after arguing with the doctor for like 20 minutes, the doctor got pissy and said, "Fine, bring him to the hospital." And then wrote a letter for my father to bring with him to the hospital. My father got a look at the letter, and it was this big passive-aggressive rant that basically went, "Ugh, sorry you have to deal with these pushy parents." But meanwhile, as soon as I got to the hospital, they were like, "Oh, effing crap, this kid's got pneumonia." And the doctor still never apologized for the record. Next story. My gynecologist sent me a check. I'd been seeing him for maybe 3 years, so a few visits. No unprofessional behavior at all, but the last visit was really out of character. He complimented my eyes and my grooming, and I paid with a check for $123 when leaving, as usual. A few days later, I received in the mail both my check I'd given at the office and a check for $250 with a smiley face in the notes section. It was very uncomfortable, and I never went back. Next story. Have had my food while in hospital kicked across the room to me because they wouldn't enter the room. Had one doctor tell me and his colleagues with over 100 years of experience have never heard of a medical condition and then brushed it off as nothing. Had another doctor almost get into a punch-up with me because he wouldn't take me off my medication that was doing more harm than good, simply because it meant more work for him. And to end on a good note though, the best bit of unprofessional manners I have seen was from a nurse who decided to brighten up my day by starting an all-out water fight with syringes. I had just gone through a major op and was the only kid on the ward, so it was quite boring, and this was her way of making it a bit more fun for me. Next story. My premature daughter was in the NICU, and I had just had an emergency C-section less than 18 hours earlier, and I'm allergic to NSAIDs, aka ouch after major surgery. The nurse told me to prepare myself because she was going to be failure to thrive. The amount of rage tears when I got back to my room. Next story. I have a feeling most of these stories will involve an OBGYN office. I have at least half a dozen stories of my own. The state of women's healthcare is such a sad thing. Pretty much all of women's health issues are under-researched as hell. When studies do get done, they also somehow inexplicably seem to relate to men. For example, they did a study on endometriosis, and what aspect of it was it on? It was on how men's sexual satisfaction is impacted when they are in a relationship with someone who has endo. But, as for me personally, I will share one story. My old OBGYN did surgery on me. I came back 3 weeks later in horrible pain. My boyfriend came with me. I was crying in the waiting room but tried really hard to pull it together to talk to the doctor. I thought I was finally going to get relief. Nope. She walks in and sees I'm not crying and says, "Oh, good, I was expecting crocodile tears." I was shocked, but I explained my pain, and she clearly did not believe me even when my boyfriend chimed in and said how he's seen me crying every night, and I was even crying in the waiting room. She then has the nurse prescribe me ibuprofen, which I already told her wasn't helping at all. I also found out later when changing doctors that she wrote in the office notes that she did not believe I was in pain. She was upset I didn't want to go on ibuprofen and made it seem like it was my only option. False. It's not like I was trying to get drugs or she had any reason to think that anyways, because I'm allergic to opioids. Anyways, I see a new doctor now that put me on Toradol until I have surgery with him next month. Next story. Not me, but a good friend of mine. His mom went into the hospital ODing. She was a bit of an alcoholic/addict when he was 14 years old. As it happened somewhat frequently, he was more annoyed than worried, but was hanging out at the hospital waiting for her. So he goes for a walk, and when he comes back, the room his mom was in is empty. So he kind of stands there looking lost until a nurse stops and asks if she can help him. He tells her he's looking for his mom, who was in that room, and she casually says like it's nothing, "Oh, they didn't tell you? She died." Next story. I had my first appointment with a new gynecologist. He looked just like George Bush and talked and sounded like Ross Perot. We spoke briefly about the exam, then he patted the table and said, "Well, bottoms up, we're gonna take you for a ride." And he wound up being my most trusted gynecologist for years, delivered my children, all of that. How could I not love a guy like that? Next story. I told a doctor I quit my anxiety meds cold turkey. Had to, no money or insurance, and had just finished withdrawing, and he got really excited and started underscoring how dangerous that was, and that it could kill me, and listing off all of the side effects I had just experienced. I asked him to please calm down for me, and he got quite embarrassed. Same doctor did save my life, though. Next story. Went to see doctor because I was getting asthma from drinking a particular beer in just this one pub. He states that it's not possible, effing Googles it right in front of me, and makes a little surprised noise after seeing a result, and writes out a prescription and hoiks me out of his office. Beginning to wonder if the bastard was even a doctor now. Next story. Changed doctors after 4 months of being sick, nauseous every time I ate, stomach cramps, fullness, whole bunch of symptoms. Lost 15 kilograms in the first 6 weeks, was now down at 45 kilograms. She looks at me and instantly goes off about how I cannot feel good if I am that thin. And I try to explain that this is my problem. I don't want to be thin. I have terrible pain and nausea when I eat. But she is having none of it. Ignores all I say and then just goes, "I've seen a lot of anorexic girls. I know what it looks like. Stop putting your finger in your throat." And she got up as I wanted to leave and then gives me a slap on the butt saying, "Just start eating again." 2 years later, today, I have been diagnosed with 4 compression syndromes, MLAS being among them, and will have surgery for them in 5 days. Kiss my bony ass, you B-word. So, ladies and gentlemen, we're towards the end here, and once again, we can glean and learn and experience that women in medicine and endometriosis, and just, it's a mess. It's a train wreck, guys. It's really bad. As I've said before, there just should not be this much nuh-uh in the medical field from your medical professionals. And I don't condone violence, but maybe if some of these people got their foot stepped on or slapped a little, or maybe a tire slashed or two, I would not be against that, because some of the people in this story kind of freaking deserve it. But anyway, guys, we're at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching, commenting. Have a really good day, and bye-bye!